Welcome to MacStories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Daylight. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Today we're going to do another installment of Pick 2, where we take two apps, we each pick one, and we go into it in a little more depth than we typically would do on some of our other episodes.
It's a classic App Stories episode. At this point, it's become a tradition. I mean, once you do something 3 times, it's a tradition.
It is.
That's the definition in the dictionary. Do it 3 times, it's now a classic.
It's a classic. It's a tradition. After you pass 1 year on a podcast, everything basically is classic or traditional.
That's the rule, yeah.
I think that's what we can call it. So we've done a few of these before, and you and I have each picked an app. And I want to start today with GoodNotes, which is a note-taking app. I recently, for Club MacStories, did a roundup of some of my favorite note-taking apps, and there are a lot of note-taking apps on iOS. And I think when it comes right down to it, the differences in some of them are very subtle, and it's hard to decide which one is best for you. And I think, unfortunately, the best you can do is try a few and figure out which you like best, because to me, a lot of this is more a matter of taste than it is a matter of features and functionality. That plays into it too, but for me, the reason I like GoodNotes a lot is because more than anything else, I really like the ink engine, the way that it happens to draw what I write. It does a nice job of being fluid, making my messy handwriting look okay. And just feels right for what I do. The other one that I would say a close second to that is Notability. And I know our friend Mike uses Notability, and I think you have in the past too, Federico.
Yeah.
But GoodNotes is the one that I keep going back to. And part of that is because Notability has things like audio recording where you can be taking notes while you record audio. And that's kind of nice if you're a student or something and you're recording a lecture and you can go back to the spot in the recording where your notes were taken. So it kind of syncs the two up. That's pretty cool, but I don't really have a use for that. Instead, what I usually use GoodNotes for is a few things. One is I'd like to, once in a while, just context switch. So what I mean by that is maybe I'm working on an article for several hours, and I've just kind of had it with being in the same app, editing the same document for hours and hours. So what I do is I'll go in Ulysses and I'll export as a PDF. Ulysses has some nice features for styling the PDF exactly the way you want.
Okay.
So I'll send that out. I'll import it into GoodNotes, and I'll just start marking it up by hand. It's a process that takes longer than if I was just doing the editing in Ulysses, but I find that switching context sometimes helps me see the words and the concepts and the ideas and the flow of the document a lot better than staring at the exact same words that I typed into a keyboard. So that's one scenario where I'll use it. I'll also use it for editing other people's stuff. If Ryan or you ask me to look at something, sometimes I find that just more convenient or a better way to work through the editing process. It's also more comfortable. You lie down on the couch or lie in bed and use the Apple Pencil and mark something up, as opposed to sitting at a table with the keyboard in front of you and typing away, which we do plenty every single day. So I like it for that as well. But the other thing I do with GoodNotes is I'll use it for kind of big picture planning. I mean, I use a separate task manager for all my to-dos for a given week. But there's a lot of minutia in there and a lot of little steps and a lot of little things I have to do in a given week. And sometimes on a Sunday, I'll just sit down and think, all right, here's what I want to accomplish during this week. And here's how I'm going to do it. Here's how I'm going to kind of balance it between Monday and say, the following Sunday. And spread it out, figure out exactly what has to happen, which days are going to be busiest because of things that I really can't avoid or I can't move, and then figure out what days I can get the rest of everything done. So it's a little bit like mind mapping, a little bit like task management, but it's a way to lay out a week, and figure out exactly what I want to get done. So I do that a lot as well. Do you use any note-taking apps, Federico?
I can relate to the idea of big picture planning using a pencil and GoodNotes. It's something that I don't do on a regular basis, but sometimes I feel the need to not type, which is kind of strange, but I almost feel like I lost the ability to handwrite especially ever since I started working. I used to handwrite all the time when I was in high school. Like, I was a serious physical mind map person. I would sketch out anything in the form of a mind map. And then with time, tablets came out and the iPad came out, and I started working, I started MacStories, and I just use a keyboard most of the time these days. And so every once in a while, I like just sitting down without staring at a keyboard, whether it's physical or virtual, and just holding the instrument that I'm going to use to put words on a page. It's not something that I do like at least once a week, probably not even once a month, but ever so often I get the need to go in there and just grab a pencil and sketch and, make plans and make lists of ideas. I don't know why, but it makes me feel relaxed. It makes me feel more present, if it makes sense.
Yeah.
I can relate to that. I don't do the teacher style correction that you do with the red pen.
I know.
I don't do that. I prefer my text editor for that. But the big picture planning, that I do when I want to, essentially.
I go through phases, and I haven't been doing the editing as much as I used to. I remember you telling me that you thought I was like one of your teachers in high school.
Yes, grading my stuff. That's what you do.
Right, which I suppose is like that. But I totally get where you're coming from in terms of the big picture planning, because it's one of those things that's a little bit hard to describe, but it's a way to kind of step back from the details that are in, Todoist or Things or OmniFocus or whatever you use, and figure out what are the projects and what are the critical things you have to get done in a given week. Or if it's not just kind of planning out your week, it's maybe you've got one big project and you're trying to figure out, all right, here are all the pieces that are involved in this project, and here's what I need to get done. And I just find that it's kind of a more organic way to figure out what you need to do. And you can go back to your task manager later and kind of fill that out and backfill exactly the minutia of what has to be done. But sometimes that big picture planning on paper, or in this case, on digital paper, is a great way to organize that sort of thing.
One of my dreams for iOS is to get the real kind of interrupt communication that doesn't need copy and paste. And I mentioned this because I was thinking about handwriting with a pencil and using apps like GoodNotes, or for example, Nebo is another one.
Mm-hmm.
They can recognize text. They can let you copy handwritten text as digital text. But I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if I could do stuff with the pencil on the screen, like write something and then make a circle around the text and say, I want to put these items, these lines of text, I want to put them in Things, or I want to send an email with them, or I want to put them in a document in Bear or Ulysses. And right now you can kind of do it if you copy the text and then you open the app and then you create a new document and paste.
Right.
I would love to see a real tight integration between apps, in that stuff like this could happen in the background without even having to show me a UI. Like, I could imagine, for example, a new workflow app made by Apple that had this kind of real communications between apps that don't use URL schemes, that don't use, all these hacks and workarounds that we have so far. But like, let me create a module for GoodNotes. It says, whenever I make this sign, put whatever it is on the page in a project in Things, and do this for me in the background, show me a message when it's done. But I don't want to see any custom UI. I don't want to deal with the share sheet. I don't want to deal with extension. And no, I don't want to write URL schemes by hand.
Right.
That's the dream of having these multiple apps that can communicate and take one input, such as handwritten text, and turn it into something else, like a list of tasks or a document or a PDF. I hope that that happens someday.
Yeah, that's a really neat idea. I like the idea of maybe just creating your own custom gestures. It's almost like creating your own keyboard shortcut, right? Where you circle that text and you have a particular gesture that is for things, or you have another gesture that sends it to notes or whatever you might do, another one to email. That's pretty cool. All right, so Federico, going a little deeper on the features of GoodNotes, there's a lot here that you can customize. So that the app is based on a notebook paradigm. You've got notebooks, and those are filled with notes. And it doesn't try to stick too closely to the paper and pen type of model. It's, you have a notebook, but when you open it, you just swipe between sheets, and each sheet is basically a screen, and you can take your notes on it. There are templates for those notebook covers. You can pick fancy ones. I tend to go for the plain ones, but there are a whole bunch built in. For the paper, there are also templates. So you can pick lined paper, blank paper, a graph paper kind of grid, or you can even create your own and bring in your own. And I think you did that, right? Didn't Sylvia create a MacStories one for you at some point?
Yes, I still have it backed up in my iCloud drive. It's a custom paper template with the MacStories logo on it.
Very nice. Yeah. So you can do those sorts of things, which kind of make it your very own, which I like. And there's one small feature that I want to mention in particular about GoodNotes, which is really small, but it is the kind of thing and the kind of attention to detail which keeps me using this app, which is as I'm writing with the Apple Pencil on my iPad screen, if I decide there's something I want to erase, I switch to the eraser and I rub out whatever it is that I don't want in my document. And when I lift the pencil, it automatically switches back to the pen tool so I can continue writing. And it's a very little thing, but it reduces the process by one tap. I don't have to go back up to the toolbar and pick the pen anymore. I just continue writing. And the benefit is that, when you're writing, your pencil is poised over the spot where you last stopped writing or where you last erased. And it's just nice to be able to pick that up just ever so slightly and then put the pencil back down and continue where you left off. It's a really nice feature. It's the kind of attention to detail that I like in apps that I use, and it makes a big difference in using GoodNotes for me. Thanks to Daylight for sponsoring App Stories this week. Daylight is an Apple CRM for small businesses that want to grow. It's packed with great features. When you're running a small business, it's critical to keep on top of customers' needs. Daylight is an all-in-one end-to-end solution specifically designed for Apple devices that helps you track business relationships from the very first meeting with someone all the way through to a completed project. Daylight integrates with Apple Mail to link email messages to clients, deals, and projects. You can also track tasks and reminders from Daylight so nothing slips through the cracks. I particularly like that Daylight handles attachments. It seems like a small thing, but the ability to attach notes, files, and estimates for a client or a project saves a lot of time you would spend otherwise searching for that kind of stuff. Daylight understands that you work with other people too. Delegate tasks and share projects so everyone knows and is kept current with your work. There's even a Zapier integration. You can also visually track projects, pipelines, and processes too. Finally, there's tight calendar integration, which makes scheduling meetings, tasks, and deadlines simple right from the home screen. And everything you can do with Daylight, you can do on a Mac, iPad, or iPhone, whether or not you're online or not. Daylight has a special deal just for App Stories listeners. Use the link in the show notes to sign up for a free trial to Daylight today. If you decide to purchase a subscription, contact them and mention that you heard about Daylight from App Stories, and they'll give you a 10% off discount for your first month. Thanks again to Daylight for supporting the show.
Okay, so I want to talk about Working Copy, which is an app that we use at MacStories every day, multiple times a day, I guess, and it's become an essential tool in our set of apps that we use to get work done. Now, Working Copy is, in theory, on the surface, when you go to the website or when you go to the App Store, it says that it's an app for programmers and developers.
Right.
People who use GitHub to store their repositories of code for software, for apps and websites, whatever. we are not programmers, John. I mean, you kind of are because you make an application, but we don't use it for programming. We use it for collaboration on text files, for collaborative markdown editing. Now, this is probably not what most people use GitHub for, but it's got an interesting backstories, I think. So for several years, I struggled with editing other people's content and vice versa, with other people editing my stuff and sending me back edits and suggestions for improvements. On MacStories, we publish articles that you see, folks see HTML and rich text. Behind the scenes, that's actually all Markdown and plain text. We write in Markdown, we send the Markdown to MacStories, and it converts to HTML because of the magic of modern plugins. And I want to be able to keep writing in Markdown and have my writers also produce content in Markdown. I don't want to ever use something like Pages or Google Docs or Word to prepare articles for MacStories. I want to stick to plain text because it's portable, it always works, and it's universal and it's lightweight. But over the years, I noticed that there really wasn't a good way to collaborate on Markdown files. So for I would say 6 to 7 years, really, our setup was kind of primitive in the sense that a writer would prepare an article, he would send the article to me, and I would prepare a list of suggestions and edits with references about either the line or the paragraph where the edit was located. And it was really time consuming and it was really slow to go through because you had to compare my edits against the original document and then make changes to that document. It was terrible. It was a terrible process. So at some point, I don't know who pushed me to try this, but I realized, maybe I could use GitHub to create a shared space where my writers and we can upload our Markdown documents and make edits to that document and keep track of those changes, because one of the best features of GitHub is the diff tool, which is a comparison tool that allows you to see the previous version of the document, the current version of the document, and color highlights for what has been discarded and what has been changed. And I remember a couple of years ago, I got in touch with Anders Borum, he's the developer of Working Copy. And I asked him very kindly, hey, can you maybe add support for GitHub's word-based diff highlights? So this is a feature that GitHub has on the website that allows you not only to see which line has changed between revisions of the same document, but also which individual word has changed. And ever since Working Copy got support for word diffs, I jumped on board and I started using the app a couple of years ago and I never stopped. So what we do is we use Working Copy with a few different repositories on GitHub, and we share our drafts of articles and stories that we're going to put on the site. We make changes to the same version of the document, and over time, thanks to Working Copy's excellent integration with GitHub, we can keep track of the edits, who made them, and also see what the edits are. And at any point, we can grab an old version and restore that version, or we can just keep editing the current one with the edits and keep pushing edits to the service. Now, the problem with GitHub is that it's kind of obscure. It's got its own terminology for things like make a commit or push a change or pull the request. It's like it's got all these custom words and terminologies that I made a guide for Ryan when Ryan started working at MacStories as a PDF document for like, here's what you need to know about GitHub and Working Copy. But really, I think overall the system, it's not perfect because again, this is not GitHub and Working Copy are not designed for what we do, but it works well because Working Copy has native Markdown support. You can preview Markdown as HTML. It works excellently with other iOS apps. And even though it's more meant for programmers and developers, it gets the job done. Would you agree with that, John?
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, you're right. The terminology does not fit with the job that we do. which is why you need that kind of guide to figure out exactly how you use this as someone who's writing articles on the web. But it is a really good tool, and it reminds me a little bit of the topic we covered a couple of weeks ago, which was everything apps versus single-purpose apps, because in a way, this is a lot like an everything app. An everything app in the sense that it works for all sorts of programming. And programming, at the end of the day, programming is text into a file that ultimately gets compiled into an app you see on some sort of device. But yes, we use a very small subset of the features that are available in working copy, but it works extremely well. And it's interesting too, because when I started writing with you at MacStories, it was right before the transition, right before you started using it. And so I remember just the first maybe 3 to 6 months that we were working together that we weren't using that. And it was so much easier once we started using working copy, because it just makes the process of communicating changes to a document so much easier between all of us.
Yeah. I mean, I wish that the terminology was explained in a better way, although, I mean, that's a problem of GitHub, not necessarily working copy.
Right.
And I also wish that there was a way for writers, especially, to have a list of all the changes. Just show me what the changes are. Instead of doing the comparison and comparing, before and after, I would love to see just the words that have changed, for example. But overall, it works really well. And I wanted to point out two aspects of working copy. First is the integration with other iOS apps. So what you can do is you can either export from your text editor and save a document into working copy. And for example, in Ulysses, what I do is I export a sheet as plain text with the markdown formatting. And I hit the share icon and I select open in another app. And then I bring up the working copy extension, which is really powerful because from the extension, not only can you go into your multiple repositories that you have in working copy, but you can select one and then you can either save the document as a new file, or you can select an existing document and say, this is a new version. I want to overwrite the old document. And of course, being GitHub, you can attach a message with your commit, which would be an updated version of the file. And from the extension itself, so all of this is working from the share sheet, basically. But you can save, which is the commit, or you can also push, which means upload. So from the extension itself, you can say, this is my new version, here are my edits, and I also want to upload this so that other people can pull it down and see my changes. So exporting from text editors, it works really, really well thanks to the extension. It's a share extension, which brings up a custom share UI. It's really well done.
Yeah, and because it's a document provider, you can use working copy as a source. You can open things in place within working copy from other apps, which is really powerful.
You can open other documents from working copy into Ulysses or into text or pretext or whatever you're using on iOS. And you can make changes in the app. You can close the document and the changes are reflected in working copy, which will tell you in the app itself. It will tell you there are changes to commit or there are changes that need to be uploaded to GitHub. So that's helpful. The second aspect, it's a recent feature. It's the files integration. So with iOS 11, working copy gained a native file provider, which allowed you to view all your folders and text files in the Files app and to essentially use working copy as a source of content from the manual file picker in any iOS app. But now, I think with I don't remember the version number, but it was released a few weeks ago. What you can do now is you can commit your edits directly from the Files app. No matter if directly from the file provider extension. So no matter if you're using the Files app or a document browser displayed in other apps like Textor or Pretext or Codex or anything that uses the native document browser in iOS 11, as long as you are into the working copy location, and if there's a document that you made changes to, you can long tap on that document. And, the copy and paste menu will appear. And on the right side, you will see a button that says commit. And that button, despite the fact that you're not into working copy and you're not using the share sheet, it will bring up the working copy extension and it will let you commit your edits and push them to GitHub directly from the Files UI without going into the middle step of using the share sheet. You can just commit right there from the Files UI in iOS 11, which I think it's a really interesting idea to use files and file providers as this interactive layer between apps. I would love in the future if Apple, I have to assume that Apple is going to work on improvements for the iOS Files app and all the extensibility framework for developers. I would love if file providers, either in the main Files app or in document browsers that live into other iOS apps, I would love if a file provider like Working Copy could show you, kind of like on a Mac, stuff like badges, for example, or little pieces of custom UI that tell you there's a document that you need to upload. So, like on a Mac, Dropbox can show you badges for folders and stuff.
Right.
That's not possible in Files for iOS. I really hope that Apple works on allowing developers, like Anders Borum for Working Copy, to say, if a document is not uploaded to GitHub, let me show you like an orange badge inside the main Files view of the document browser. Right now, that's not possible. I would love if Apple opened this up a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that, and it would actually make things a lot simpler in a lot of ways for what we do. It would.
Yeah.
You'd have a much better sense for what has been changed, but not synced to everybody else.
I'm really a huge fan of Working Copy. The app keeps growing with new features for programmers and, folks who are much more serious about GitHub than we are. This is one of the apps that I see all the time. Whenever I see articles from like programmers who are going iPad only or folks who are trying the app for the first time, Working Copy is always mentioned, and for good reason. This app is amazing if you deal with any kind of text or code, and especially if you're a writer and you're intrigued by the idea of essentially version control, but for Markdown, you should absolutely give this a try.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. This is an app that we have used basically every single day since we started using it back in early 2016. It's incredibly powerful, and we only use a small subset of it, but there's a lot here, not just for writers like us, but also for programmers. So it's definitely worth checking out. All right, Federico, I think that is a good place to put a pin in it for the week. And thanks again to our sponsor, Daylight. We'll be back next week with another new episode. In the meantime, you can read the things that we're writing on MacStories.net and on Club MacStories if you're a member. And you can find Federico on Twitter. He's at Viticci, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.